Welcome to tonight's quiet little corner of curiosity, where we are going to talk about something almost every cat owner has seen but never really stopped to think about. A cat sitting perfectly still at a window, eyes locked on a bird outside, tail twitching in short little jerks, sometimes making a strange chattering sound with its jaw. It looks almost involuntary, like the cat cannot help itself. And in a way, it cannot. Tonight we are going to slowly work through why this happens. Not just the simple answer everyone already knows, that cats hunt birds, but the deeper layers underneath it. Why the eyes work the way they do. Why the tail twitches. Why that strange chattering sound exists at all, and what scientists actually think it means. Picture a living room in late afternoon. Sunlight cutting a long stripe across the carpet. A cat perched on the back of a couch, completely frozen, staring out through the window at something small and quick moving along a fence line. Nothing else in the room exists to that cat right now. Not the television. Not the person calling its name from the kitchen. Just the bird. This particular kind of stillness, the kind that borders on obsession, is written deep into a cat's biology, older than the couch, older than the window, older than the house itself. Long before cats ever curled up on a cushion, their ancestors were small, solitary hunters watching exactly this kind of movement for one reason only: survival. That old wiring never really left, even after thousands of years of domestication softened almost everything else about how cats live. We will start with something simple. The eyes. Because that is really where this entire story begins, and it turns out there is a lot more happening inside a cat's stare than most people ever stop to consider. A cat's eyes are not built the way ours are, and the difference explains a lot about why birds specifically seem to trigger this reaction so strongly. Cat eyes contain a much higher number of motion-detecting cells packed into the retina compared to human eyes. This means a cat can register tiny, fast movements that a person would barely notice, a leaf twitching in the wind, a shadow flickering, and especially, a small bird hopping and darting the way birds constantly do. Birds move in short, unpredictable bursts. A hop, a pause, a sudden flutter, another pause. That exact pattern of movement happens to be almost perfectly matched to what a cat's visual system is built to detect and respond to. It is not that cats simply like birds more than other animals. It is that birds move in a way that lights up a cat's brain more intensely than almost anything else in the natural world. There is also the matter of peripheral vision. Cats have an extremely wide field of view, and much of that wide field is especially sensitive to movement rather than sharp detail. A bird darting along the edge of a cat's vision gets picked up almost instantly, pulling the cat's full attention toward it before the cat has even consciously decided to look. None of this is learned behavior. A kitten that has never seen a bird before will still lock onto one the very first time, eyes widening, body going still, as if some old switch just flipped on inside it. No mother cat has to teach this. No practice is required. It simply arrives, fully formed, the moment the right kind of movement crosses the kitten's field of view for the very first time. That switch is what we will look at next, and it turns out to be a lot more structured than most people would expect from something that looks, on the surface, like pure instinct running wild. That switch has a name among behaviorists, sometimes called the predatory sequence, and it is essentially a chain of instinctive steps that almost every cat runs through automatically once something triggers it. Stalk, chase, pounce, kill, bite. Each step flows into the next, almost like a program running in the background of the cat's brain. Watching a bird through a window activates the very first stages of this sequence, the stalking instinct in particular, even though the cat knows, on some level, that it cannot actually reach the bird. The glass does not seem to fully register as an obstacle to that older, instinctive part of the brain. The eyes see prey. The body prepares to hunt. And because the hunt cannot actually happen, all of that built-up energy has nowhere to go. This is part of why the behavior looks so intense sometimes, almost frustrated. The cat's body is fully committed to a hunt that will never be finished. Muscles tense. Pupils widen. The whole nervous system shifts into a heightened, focused state, all triggered by something as small as a sparrow landing on a fence post outside, a full physiological response aimed at a target the cat has no real chance of ever reaching. It is worth remembering that domestic cats are still, biologically speaking, extremely close to their wild ancestors. Thousands of years of living alongside humans has changed a lot about how cats behave day to day: softer temperaments, dependence on people for food, a general comfort around household noise and activity, but it has barely touched this particular instinct at all. The hunting sequence sits underneath all of that, largely untouched, ready to switch on the moment the right trigger appears. Next, we get to the strangest part of this whole behavior, the sound, and it is one that has puzzled even people who have studied cats closely for years. The chattering sound many cats make while watching birds has genuinely puzzled researchers for a long time, and there is still no single, fully agreed upon explanation for it. Some cats produce a rapid clicking or chattering noise with their jaw, almost like their teeth are vibrating, usually right at the moment their focus on the bird is most intense. One leading idea is that this chattering mimics the killing bite cats use on small prey, a fast, precise bite to the back of the neck. Under this theory, the cat's jaw is essentially rehearsing that bite, almost twitching through the motion out of pure anticipation, even though the bird is completely out of reach. Another idea points toward frustration itself. Some researchers believe the chattering may be a physical release valve for the buildup of hunting energy that has nowhere else to go, similar to how a person might tap their foot or clench their jaw when they are keyed up about something they cannot act on yet, a small, involuntary way of burning off tension the body has no other outlet for. A few studies have also explored whether the sound might relate to a cat's own vocal patterns, an odd overlap between hunting instinct and communication that scientists have not fully untangled. Whatever the exact reason, the chattering shows up specifically around birds far more often than around any other kind of prey, which suggests something about birds in particular sets it off, whether it is their sudden movement, their distant unreachable position, or some combination of both that researchers have not yet fully separated out. We will look next at whether some cats truly are more bird-obsessed than others, and why that might come down to something as ordinary as how a cat spent its first few months of life. Not every cat reacts to birds with the same intensity, and that variation turns out to be genuinely interesting. Some cats barely glance at a bird outside the window. Others will sit for hours, completely fixated, refusing to move even when called. Researchers studying feline behavior have found that this difference often comes down to a mix of breed tendencies, early life experience, and individual personality. Cats raised around a lot of outdoor stimulation as kittens, even just watching birds and insects through a window early on, often develop a stronger, more consistent fixation later in life. The behavior seems to get reinforced the more a cat's brain practices that stalking sequence, even in its incomplete, window-bound form. Certain breeds also show more pronounced hunting drive in general. Breeds developed with closer ties to working or semi-wild ancestry sometimes display more intense focus and longer attention spans during this kind of watching, compared to breeds bred primarily for a calmer, more relaxed temperament suited more toward lounging than stalking. Age plays a role too. Younger cats, especially kittens and cats under 2 years old, tend to show far more dramatic reactions, complete with chattering, tail lashing, and crouched posture, compared to older cats who might simply watch calmly without much physical response at all, the instinct still present but expressed with far less urgency. A senior cat may still notice every bird that lands on the fence, it just no longer feels the need to announce it quite so dramatically. Sex and neuter status can play a small role too, though the effect tends to be far less noticeable than breed, age, or early experience, and most researchers consider it a minor factor at best compared to everything else shaping the behavior. There is something worth mentioning here about how deeply this fixation goes beyond simple hunger. A perfectly well-fed house cat, one that has never had to hunt a single meal in its entire life, will still react to a bird outside the window with the exact same intensity as a cat that genuinely needs to catch food to survive. This tells researchers something important. The behavior is not really about hunger at all. It appears to be almost entirely instinct-driven, wired and regardless of whether the cat actually needs to eat. In a strange way, watching birds may function similarly to play behavior in cats, activating the same reward pathways in the brain that make chasing a toy mouse or a laser pointer feel satisfying, even though nothing is actually caught or eaten at the end of it. Some behaviorists describe this as a kind of built-in entertainment system, one that evolution never anticipated would end up being triggered mostly through a pane of glass rather than an actual outdoor hunt. The instinct exists because it once meant survival for a cat's ancestors. The window scenario is simply a strange, modern side effect of an ancient drive still running exactly the way it always has. This is part of why so many cat owners describe bird watching as one of their cat's favorite activities, right alongside actual play. In a sense, it genuinely might be a form of play, just one the cat did not choose and cannot fully finish, which may be exactly why it holds a cat's attention for so much longer than most toys ever manage to. Some owners even notice their cat returning to the same window at roughly the same time each day, almost as if it has learned when the birds are most likely to show up outside, a small routine built entirely around an instinct that never actually gets to complete itself. Cats are not the only animals with a strong visual pull toward birds, but the specific combination of traits that makes cats react this way is fairly unique among household pets. Dogs, for comparison, tend to rely far more heavily on scent than sight when it comes to tracking prey, which is part of why a dog's reaction to a bird outside a window often looks noticeably less intense or focused than a cat's. A cat's entire hunting toolkit evolved around vision and stealth rather than smell and stamina. Wild cat ancestors were ambush predators, built for short, explosive bursts of speed and precision rather than long chases. Birds, with their sudden, darting movement and constant unpredictability, represent almost exactly the kind of target that hunting style was built for. This helps explain why birds specifically seem to capture a cat's attention more consistently than, say, a slow-moving turtle or a stationary flower bed might. Movement speed and unpredictability matter enormously to a cat's visual system, and few common backyard animals combine both traits as reliably as birds do. Even indoor cats that have spent their entire lives inside a house, never once setting a paw outdoors, still show this exact same fixation the very first time they encounter a bird through glass, further evidence that none of this had to be taught. It was simply waiting there already, built into the wiring from the very beginning, passed down largely unchanged through generation after generation of cats that never once had to hunt for a single meal. Even the specific angle and speed of a bird's flight seems to matter. Cats tend to react most strongly to horizontal, darting movement rather than a bird simply gliding overhead, which lines up closely with how ground-level prey would have moved for a cat's wild ancestors. Owners sometimes wonder whether all this window watching is stressful for their cat, given how intense and focused the behavior can look. Researchers studying this generally suggest the opposite is more often true. For most cats, watching birds appears to be mentally stimulating in a genuinely positive way, offering a kind of enrichment that indoor cats otherwise often lack compared to cats with regular outdoor access. This has led many veterinarians and behaviorists to actively recommend window perches or bird feeders placed just outside a window specifically as a form of enrichment for indoor cats. The idea is not to torment the cat with something it cannot reach, but rather to give its natural instincts a healthy, safe outlet, similar to why toys that mimic prey movement are recommended for indoor cats generally. That said, a few behaviorists do note that for a small number of especially high-strung or anxious cats, constant unreachable stimulation might occasionally tip toward frustration rather than enjoyment, particularly if the cat has no other outlets for that hunting energy, like regular play sessions with a toy it can actually catch. Most cats, though, seem to settle easily between watching and resting, the behavior coming and going in short, natural bursts throughout the day, much like it likely did for their wild ancestors watching prey move through tall grass, waiting patiently for the right moment that, indoors, never quite needs to come. A cat might watch intently for 10 minutes, then simply walk away and curl up for a nap, no lingering frustration in sight, the whole episode already forgotten. Veterinary behaviorists generally agree that a healthy mix of window watching, interactive play, and occasional puzzle feeders offers indoor cats the most complete outlet for these old instincts, keeping both body and mind reasonably satisfied throughout an ordinary day. Stepping back now across everything covered so far, a fairly complete picture starts to come together. The sharp, motion-tuned eyes built specifically to catch small, erratic movement. The old predatory sequence still running quietly in the background of every domestic cat's brain, triggered the instant a bird appears. The strange, still not fully understood chattering sound, likely tied somehow to that unfinished killing bite. The clear evidence that this has nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with instinct. And the individual variation shaped by breed, age, and early experience that makes some cats far more obsessed with this behavior than others. None of it is really about the bird itself, not entirely. It is about an ancient hunting system, refined over an enormous stretch of evolutionary time, still fully intact inside an animal that mostly spends its days napping on a couch and eating from a bowl. The window just happens to be where that old system still gets triggered, over and over again, completely unbothered by the fact that the glass will never actually let the hunt finish, day after day, year after year, the same quiet ritual repeating itself. There is more to this story worth exploring further, including how this behavior connects to indoor cat well-being more broadly, and a few more surprising details about what exactly is happening inside a cat's mind during those long, silent minutes at the window, details that researchers are still slowly piecing together one careful observation at a time. For now, the cat stays where it is, tail twitching gently, eyes fixed on something small and quick just beyond the glass, playing out an instinct thousands of years older than the window it is sitting in front of. One detail that surprises a lot of cat owners is how differently a cat treats a bird outside a window compared to almost anything else moving through its field of view. A leaf blowing across the yard gets a glance, maybe a flick of the ear. A dog walking past on a leash might get a brief look before the cat loses interest entirely. But a bird, even a small one sitting fairly still on a branch, tends to hold a cat's attention far longer than either of those. Part of the explanation comes down to unpredictability. A leaf moves in one continuous, fairly boring direction. A bird, by contrast, might sit motionless for several seconds, then suddenly hop, tilt its head, take off in one direction, land somewhere else entirely. That kind of unpredictable, start-stop movement keeps a cat's visual system engaged in a way steady, predictable motion simply cannot match. There is also the shape and size of the target itself. Birds tend to fall within a fairly specific size range that closely matches what a cat's ancestors would have hunted in the wild, small enough to be a realistic target, large enough to register clearly against the background. Something too large, like a dog, does not trigger the same predatory response, since it falls outside the size range a cat's brain associates with prey rather than threat or simple curiosity. Color, interestingly, seems to matter far less than movement and size. Cats have limited color vision compared to humans, so a bright red cardinal and a dull brown sparrow tend to attract roughly the same level of interest, provided both are moving in that same erratic, unpredictable way. We will look next at what is actually happening inside a cat's brain during these long watching sessions, which turns out to be considerably more active than the cat's stillness would suggest, involving far more than simple visual processing. Researchers who study feline neurology have used brain imaging in a handful of studies to get a rough picture of what happens when a cat locks onto a moving target like a bird. The visual cortex, unsurprisingly, lights up heavily, but so do regions tied to motor planning, areas of the brain responsible for organizing movement before it actually happens. This matters because it suggests the cat is not simply watching passively the way a person might watch a television screen. On some level, its brain is already planning the stalk, calculating angles, distances, and timing, even though the body stays almost perfectly still. The stillness itself takes real effort. Every muscle is coiled and ready, holding back a movement that the brain has already partly rehearsed. Heart rate tends to climb slightly during intense bird watching too, along with small changes in breathing pattern, both signs of a body quietly preparing for exertion that, indoors, will likely never come. In a strange way, a cat sitting at a window can be under something close to mild physical stress, not the harmful kind, but the same kind of readiness a person might feel right before stepping onto a starting line, minus any actual race to run. This helps explain why some cats seem tired or unusually calm after a long bird-watching session, almost as if they had actually gone through a full hunt rather than simply sitting by a window the whole time. The energy spent is real, even if it never actually turns into a chase. A handful of researchers have also looked at pupil dilation during these episodes, finding that pupils tend to widen noticeably beyond what normal indoor lighting alone would explain, a visible sign of the same heightened arousal state showing up in the eyes themselves, easy for an attentive owner to spot without any equipment at all. Bird feeders placed near windows have become a fairly common way for cat owners to lean into this behavior deliberately, treating it almost like a form of television made specifically for cats. Pet product companies have picked up on this too, and in recent years a small but genuine market has grown around window-mounted bird feeders designed with a clear pane of one-way film, letting birds feed comfortably while giving an indoor cat an unobstructed, close-up view. Some shelters and veterinary clinics have started using similar setups in their own waiting areas and cat wards, having noticed that a well-placed bird feeder outside a window tends to keep cats calmer and more engaged during what can otherwise be a stressful, unfamiliar environment. It is a low-cost, low-effort form of enrichment that seems to work fairly reliably across a wide range of individual cats. There is a small but important safety consideration that often gets overlooked here. Cats fixated on a bird outside a window have been known to leap directly at the glass, especially kittens, or younger cats with less impulse control, occasionally causing minor injuries or knocking over nearby objects in the process. Securing feeders at a reasonable distance, and making sure window screens are sturdy, helps keep this otherwise harmless behavior from turning into an accident. Screened porches and open windows without proper screening pose an even greater risk, since a sufficiently excited cat may attempt to push through or squeeze past a loose screen entirely, chasing a bird it has absolutely no chance of catching but every instinct telling it to try anyway. Next, we will look at how this instinct compares across the wider cat family, from house cats all the way up to their much larger wild relatives, a comparison that turns out to be surprisingly close once you actually watch it play out side by side. Bird feeders placed near windows have become a fairly common way for cat owners to lean into this behavior deliberately, treating it almost like a form of television made specifically for cats. Pet product companies have picked up on this too, and in recent years a small but genuine market has grown around window-mounted bird feeders designed with a clear pane of one-way film, letting birds feed comfortably while giving an indoor cat an unobstructed, close-up view. Some shelters and veterinary clinics have started using similar setups in their own waiting areas and cat wards, having noticed that a well-placed bird feeder outside a window tends to keep cats calmer and more engaged during what can otherwise be a stressful, unfamiliar environment. It is a low-cost, low-effort form of enrichment that seems to work fairly reliably across a wide range of individual cats. There is a small but important safety consideration that often gets overlooked here. Cats fixated on a bird outside a window have been known to leap directly at the glass, especially kittens, or younger cats with less impulse control, occasionally causing minor injuries or knocking over nearby objects in the process. Securing feeders at a reasonable distance, and making sure window screens are sturdy, helps keep this otherwise harmless behavior from turning into an accident. Screened porches and open windows without proper screening pose an even greater risk, since a sufficiently excited cat may attempt to push through or squeeze past a loose screen entirely, chasing a bird it has absolutely no chance of catching but every instinct telling it to try anyway. Next, we will look at how this instinct compares across the wider cat family, from house cats all the way up to their much larger wild relatives, a comparison that turns out to be surprisingly close once you actually watch it play out side by side. Indoor cats and outdoor cats tend to show some real differences in how they express this birdwatching behavior, shaped largely by how often each group actually gets a chance to act on the instinct. Outdoor or indoor-outdoor cats, ones that occasionally do get to complete an actual hunt, sometimes appear slightly less intense during window watching sessions, since some of that pent-up hunting drive has an outlet elsewhere. Fully indoor cats, by contrast, often show more prolonged and more frequent bouts of window watching, since the window may represent one of very few opportunities the cat has to engage this particular instinct at all. This is part of why many veterinarians consider window access, ideally paired with a comfortable perch, an important piece of indoor cat well-being rather than a minor, optional luxury. There is a flip side worth mentioning too. Outdoor cats that do successfully hunt birds contribute to a genuinely significant conservation concern, since domestic and feral cats collectively account for a substantial number of wild bird deaths each year across many countries. This has led some regions to actively encourage keeping cats indoors, or building supervised outdoor enclosures sometimes called cadios, partly for the cat's own safety, and partly to protect local bird populations from an instinct that, out in the open, comes with real consequences. For owners simply looking to give an indoor cat a safe outlet, the solution is usually far less complicated: a window perch, a bird feeder placed a safe distance away, and occasional supervised, screened-in outdoor time, enough to satisfy most of that old instinct without any real risk for either the cat or the birds. Certain sounds seem to intensify a cat's reaction to birds almost as much as the visual movement itself. Birdsong playing through a speaker, even without any visible bird nearby, has been shown in informal observation to trigger at least a partial version of the stalking response in many cats, ears swiveling toward the source, body tensing slightly, attention locking on even before the eyes find anything to actually look at. This suggests hearing plays a meaningful supporting role alongside vision in the overall behavior, even if sight remains the dominant sense driving the most intense reactions. A cat's ears are remarkably good at pinpointing the exact direction and distance of a sound, another leftover advantage from a hunting lifestyle built around locating small, hard-to-see prey rustling through grass or brush. Some cat enrichment videos, designed specifically to be played on a television or tablet for a cat's entertainment, lean heavily on this combination of visual movement and matching bird sounds, and anecdotally seem to hold a cat's attention considerably longer than silent footage of the same birds moving across the screen. Whether this counts as genuinely enriching or simply another version of the same unfinished hunting loop remains a bit of an open question among behaviorists, though most agree it is, at minimum, harmless, and for many cats, genuinely enjoyable. Some multi-cat households have noticed an interesting side effect too. One cat locking onto a sound or movement often draws the attention of nearby cats as well, a kind of quiet contagious focus spreading through the room even before the second cat has spotted whatever triggered the first one's interest. This social spread of attention hints at something worth remembering about cats generally, that even a fairly solitary hunter still pays close attention to what its housemates find interesting. A cat's whiskers play a smaller but still interesting role in this whole behavior, particularly the whiskers positioned above the eyes and along the jawline. These whiskers are highly sensitive to tiny changes in air movement, and some researchers believe they help a cat judge distance and space more precisely during the final, most intense stages of a stalk, even one that never actually leaves the windowsill. During a bird watching session, cats often angle these whiskers forward, fanning them out slightly, a subtle sign of heightened focus that is easy to miss unless you are looking closely. It is one more small physical detail layered into a behavior that, at first glance, looks like nothing more than a cat sitting still and staring. Tail position tells its own part of the story too. A slow, controlled twitch at just the very tip usually signals calm, focused interest. A faster, wider sweep involving the whole tail often signals mounting excitement or frustration, particularly as a bird moves closer or performs some sudden, unexpected motion. Experienced cat owners often learn to read this tail language almost instinctively over time, gauging roughly how invested their cat is in a particular bird without ever needing to see its face. Even the ears play their own small part in this quiet display. Forward rotated, slightly flattened ears often accompany the most intense stretches of focus, swiveling occasionally to track sound even while the eyes stay locked firmly on the bird itself. Taken together, the whiskers, the tail, and the ears form a kind of full-body readout of exactly how engaged a cat is at any given moment, a language most owners pick up without ever consciously studying it, simply from years of watching the same cat settle into the same window, over and over again. Kittens raised without much exposure to moving prey-like stimuli during their early weeks sometimes show a noticeably delayed or weaker version of this birdwatching instinct later in life, though it rarely disappears entirely. This lines up with a broader pattern seen across a lot of animal behavior, where a genuine, hardwired instinct still benefits from at least some early exposure or practice to fully develop into its most complete form. Breeders and shelters that specialize in early kitten socialization have started paying closer attention to this, sometimes deliberately introducing safe, supervised exposure to moving toys, feathers, or even recorded bird footage during a kitten's early development window. The goal is not to create a more intense hunter necessarily, but to make sure the kitten's natural instincts get a healthy, normal chance to develop rather than sitting dormant from lack of stimulation. Interestingly, cats that miss this early exposure entirely, some rescue cats raised in unusually barren environments, for example, often show a strong and sudden interest in birds the very first time they encounter proper stimulation later in life, suggesting the underlying instinct was there all along, just waiting for the right trigger to finally show up. This offers a small but meaningful piece of reassurance for anyone adopting an older cat with an uncertain past. Even years of limited stimulation rarely erase the instinct completely. It simply waits, sometimes for a surprisingly long time, until the right window and the right bird finally arrive. Shelters have started factoring this into how they design cat housing too, adding window access wherever possible, since even a brief daily dose of bird watching seems to noticeably improve mood and reduce stress-related behaviors in cats waiting for adoption. A small change with a fairly outsized benefit. There is a particular myth worth gently correcting here, the idea that cats watch birds purely out of boredom, with nothing better to do. While enrichment and mental stimulation certainly play a role in how satisfying the behavior feels to a cat, the underlying drive to watch and track a bird exists independently of boredom entirely. Even a cat with plenty of toys, attention, and playtime available will still stop everything the instant a bird appears outside. This distinction matters because it shapes how owners think about the behavior. It is not a sign that a cat's life lacks stimulation, nor is it something that needs to be corrected or redirected away from. It is simply one of the clearest, most visible windows into a cat's underlying nature that most owners get to witness on a near daily basis, right there on an ordinary windowsill, no special circumstances required. Some behaviorists have started describing this kind of instinct-driven behavior as a core part of what makes a domestic cat still genuinely feel like a cat, rather than a purely tame, fully reshaped companion animal. Underneath the soft fur and the affectionate head bumps, something considerably older and wilder is still quietly running in the background, and the bird outside the window is one of the few things reliably capable of bringing it fully to the surface. It is worth sitting with that thought for a moment, that the same animal curled up asleep on a lap an hour earlier can, within seconds, shift into something focused entirely on an ancient, unfinished pursuit, and then, just as easily, shift right back again, purring contentedly as though nothing at all had happened in between. Few other everyday moments in a house cat's life reveal quite so much about what it actually is underneath the domesticity. Looking back across everything covered in this section, a clearer picture starts to take shape around just how layered this simple, everyday behavior really is. The unpredictable, size-specific movement that separates birds from nearly everything else a cat notices outside. The active brain activity hiding underneath that deceptively still posture. The safety considerations tied to feeder placement and window strength. The shared instinct connecting a house cat to lions and leopards on entirely different continents. The role sound and whiskers quietly play alongside vision. And the reminder that this behavior has nothing to do with boredom, and everything to do with something built deep into a cat's nature long before any house or window ever existed. Together they build toward a much fuller understanding of a scene that plays out in millions of homes every single day, usually without anyone giving it more than a passing glance, an ordinary moment carrying far more history and biology inside it than its stillness would ever suggest. There is still more worth exploring here, particularly around how owners can safely and thoughtfully support this instinct, and a few remaining details about what exactly draws certain individual cats towards certain individual birds, sometimes with what almost looks like genuine personal preference. One bird ignored entirely, another watched for an hour without pause. A small mystery that even the cat itself would probably struggle to explain. Toy manufacturers figured out a long time ago that anything resembling a bird tends to hold a cat's attention far better than most other toy shapes. Feather wands, in particular, remain one of the most consistently effective cat toys on the market, decades after they first became popular, precisely because they mimic that same erratic, fluttering movement so closely. The best feather toys, according to a lot of experienced owners and a few informal behaviorist observations, are not the ones moved in smooth, predictable arcs. They are the ones twitched, paused, and darted unpredictably, closer to how an actual bird moves than how a person might naturally think to wave a toy around. A cat can often tell the difference almost instantly, losing interest quickly in a toy moved too smoothly, too rhythmically, compared to one that stutters and jumps the way real prey would. This has led some pet product designers to build small motorized bird-like toys specifically engineered around these irregular movement patterns, sometimes paired with a chirping or fluttering sound to sweeten the effect further. Reviews from cat owners on these products frequently mention a level of sustained interest that far outpaces simpler, mechanically repetitive toys, further evidence that it really is the specific quality of the movement, not just motion in general, driving so much of this fascination. Some owners have tried recreating this effect with nothing more than a piece of string tied to a stick, dragging it in short, unpredictable bursts, and reported results nearly as good as anything bought from a pet store. Cat behaviorists sometimes recommend rotating a few different feather toys in and out of use, since a cat's interest in a fixed toy tends to fade over repeated exposure in a way its interest in real, ever-changing birds simply never does. There is a seasonal pattern worth mentioning here too, one plenty of cat owners notice without ever quite putting a name to it. Bird activity around most homes tends to shift noticeably across the year, busier during spring and fall migration periods, quieter during the coldest stretches of winter when many species have moved elsewhere entirely. Cats seem to track this shift closely, even without any real awareness of migration as a concept. Window watching sessions often become noticeably longer and more frequent during spring, when nesting activity and general bird traffic pick up sharply, then taper off again as autumn gives way to winter's quieter months. Some owners in regions with active backyard bird feeders report their cats becoming almost restless during the peak of spring migration, moving between different windows throughout the day, chasing whichever view currently offers the most activity. It is a small, seasonal rhythm running quietly underneath an otherwise fairly stable daily routine, shaped entirely by something happening well outside the house, in the wider patterns of birds passing through on their way somewhere else. Owners who track this closely sometimes notice their cat's whole daily schedule shifting slightly with the seasons, more time at windows during the busiest weeks of migration, more time napping elsewhere once activity outside quiets back down. It is a subtle reminder that even a cat living entirely indoors, insulated from weather and season in almost every other way, still stays quietly tuned to a rhythm unfolding well beyond the walls of the house itself. This connection between a cat's internal rhythm and events happening entirely outside its control is worth sitting with for a moment. The cat has no calendar, no awareness of migration as a concept, and yet its behavior shifts in step with it anyway, guided by nothing more than what happens to pass by its own window each day. Nighttime brings its own separate version of this behavior, one that gets far less attention than the daytime bird watching most people are familiar with. Cats are naturally most active during dawn and dusk, a pattern called crepuscular activity, which happens to line up closely with when a lot of birds are also most active, feeding and moving before full daylight or after it starts to fade. This overlap means some of the most intense window watching sessions actually happen in low light, early morning or early evening, rather than the middle of a bright afternoon most people picture. A cat's exceptional night vision, built around a reflective layer behind the retina, gives it a real advantage in these dimmer conditions, letting it spot movement that a person standing at the same window might completely miss. Moths and other night-flying insects sometimes draw a similar, though generally less intense, version of this same fixation after dark, particularly around porch lights or windows lit from inside a dark room. The underlying trigger, small, fast, unpredictable movement, stays consistent whether the target outside happens to be a sparrow at 7 in the morning or a moth circling a porch light at 9 at night. This is part of why some cats seem restless right around dawn, pacing near a window well before their owner is even awake, responding to birds already stirring outside long before most humans in the house have opened their eyes. It is one of the quieter, less discussed rhythms of indoor cat life, largely invisible unless someone happens to be awake at exactly the same early hour to notice it happening. This same overlap partly explains why cats are sometimes described as more active right around sunrise and sunset, a pattern that has less to do with the cat's own energy cycle and isolation and more to do with how closely that cycle tracks the activity of the small creatures it evolved to watch. The relationship between cats and birds actually stretches back much further than most people realize, tangled up in the earliest days of cat domestication itself. Researchers studying ancient settlements believe cats first began living alongside humans roughly 10,000 years ago, drawn initially not by birds at all, but by rodents attracted to stored grain in early agricultural communities. Birds, though, were never far behind on the list of things an early domestic cat would have hunted opportunistically, particularly ground-feeding species drawn to the same grain stores and scattered food scraps found around human settlements. Over thousands of years, as cats spread alongside human trade and travel, this same opportunistic interest in birds spread with them, largely unchanged, into essentially every environment cats eventually settled into. Some archaeologists studying cat remains found near ancient trading ports have noted bird bones showing up frequently in nearby waste deposits, indirect but suggestive evidence that this particular predator-prey relationship has been playing out around human homes for an extraordinarily long stretch of history, long before glass windows ever existed to watch it through. By the time cats reached ancient Egypt, where they were eventually held in considerable cultural regard, bird hunting was already a well-established, unremarkable part of everyday cat behavior, mentioned in passing rather than treated as anything unusual. The window may be new. The instinct behind what happens at it clearly is not. It is worth remembering, too, that for most of that long shared history, cats and birds simply coexisted around the edges of human settlements without any glass barrier at all, the hunt either succeeding or failing outright, with none of the strange, suspended tension a modern window now creates. Different cat breeds show some genuinely interesting variation in how strongly and how often this birdwatching behavior shows up, beyond just the general working versus companion breed distinction touched on earlier. Bengals, a breed developed partly from wild Asian leopard cat ancestry, are frequently described by owners as unusually intense and persistent bird watchers, often spending far longer at a window than many other breeds seem willing to. Siamese cats, known generally for high energy and vocal communication, also tend to show fairly pronounced reactions, sometimes narrating their own bird-watching sessions with a steady stream of chirps, trills, and the occasional loud meow directed at nothing in particular except the bird itself. On the calmer end, breeds like the ragdoll or the British shorthair, generally bred toward a more relaxed, easygoing temperament, tend to show noticeably milder versions of the behavior, still watching, still occasionally chattering, but usually with far less physical intensity and far shorter attention spans than their more high-drive counterparts. None of this means a calmer breed lacks the instinct entirely, only that it expresses itself with less visible urgency. A British shorthair might watch the same bird just as attentively as a Bengal, simply without the tail lashing, the chattering, or the crouched, coiled posture that makes the more intense breeds so noticeably dramatic to watch from across the room. Mixed breed cats, making up the vast majority of house cats worldwide, tend to fall somewhere across this whole spectrum, their individual intensity shaped less by any single breed standard and more by the particular mix of genetics, personality, and early experience each cat happens to carry. A cat's tail during a bird watching session can shift through several distinct patterns depending on how the situation unfolds, and paying close attention to these shifts offers a surprisingly detailed window into what the cat is actually experiencing moment to moment. A slow, low sweep usually signals calm, sustained interest, the kind that might continue steadily for 10 or 15 minutes without much change. A sudden switch to rapid, twitchy movement, especially concentrated just at the tip, tends to show up right as a bird performs some unexpected action, a sudden hop closer, an abrupt change in direction, anything that spikes the cat's attention sharply in that particular moment. Full body tail lashing, involving the entire length rather than just the tip, generally signals the most intense stretch of frustration or excitement, often paired with that jaw-chattering sound discussed earlier in this story. Some owners have described learning to predict, almost to the second, exactly when their cat will let out a chatter simply by watching the tail closely enough, the physical tell arriving just a beat or two before the sound itself. Body posture lower down tells its own part of the story too. Weight shifted onto the back legs, front paws set slightly forward, hindquarters gently rocking side to side in short, controlled movements, all classic signs that the stalking sequence has fully activated, even if the cat never actually moves from its spot on the sill for the entire length of the session. That small rocking motion in particular tends to catch people's attention once they know to look for it, a subtle wind-up that mirrors, almost exactly, the same preparatory movement a cat makes right before pouncing on an actual toy, just held indefinitely in place by the glass between the cat and its target. Weather plays a quieter but genuinely real role in shaping how much bird watching happens on any given day. Overcast, rainy days tend to reduce overall bird activity around most homes, which in turn tends to reduce how much time a cat spends locked onto the window, simply because there is less movement outside worth watching in the first place. Bright, calm days, particularly following a period of rain, often bring a noticeable spike in both bird activity and cat interest, sometimes described by owners as their cat seeming unusually eager to get to the window first thing after several quieter, wetter days in a row. Wind adds its own complication, since strong gusts can make bird movement erratic in a different, less predictable way than the usual hop and pause pattern cats seem most tuned to, occasionally leading to shorter, more scattered watching sessions rather than the long, steady focus seen on calmer days. Snow cover changes the picture further still, sometimes concentrating birds more heavily around feeders as natural food sources become harder to find, which can turn a single feeder into an unusually busy, cat-fascinating hub of activity for the entire stretch of a snowy week. Even indoor temperature seems to play a small supporting role. Cats often prefer settling near a window on cooler days when the glass itself feels pleasantly cool against warm fur, meaning a chilly, bird-active morning can end up being one of the most reliably popular windowsill hours of the entire week. Sunlight adds a final layer on top of all this. A sunbeam falling directly across a favorite windowsill can turn an already appealing bird-watching spot into an almost irresistible one, warmth and prey activity combining into exactly the kind of setup most cats find very difficult to walk away from. There is a particular question worth addressing directly here, one that comes up fairly often among cat owners. Do cats actually recognize individual birds, the same sparrow returning day after day, for instance, or does every bird register as essentially the same generic stimulus each time it appears? The honest answer is that researchers do not fully know yet, though there is some reason to think cats may notice at least broad differences. Cats have demonstrated fairly strong object permanence and memory in other controlled studies, remembering the location of hidden food or toys for extended periods, which suggests at least the cognitive capacity for this kind of recognition could exist. Anecdotally, some owners report their cats reacting with noticeably more excitement to certain regular visitors, a bold jay that lands close to the glass, for example, compared to a more distant, less frequently seen species. Whether this reflects true individual recognition or simply a stronger reaction to bolder, closer, more attention-grabbing behavior remains genuinely unclear, one of several small mysteries still sitting quietly inside this larger story. Some researchers studying cat cognition more broadly suspect the answer may eventually turn out to be somewhere in between, cats likely not recognizing individual birds the way they recognize individual people or other cats, but still forming some rough, general sense of familiarity with regular visitors over time, enough to notice when something changes, even if the details remain fuzzy. Settling this question properly would require fairly involved controlled studies, tracking a cat's reactions to the same individual bird across repeated visits versus a rotating set of unfamiliar ones, research that, as far as anyone currently knows, simply has not been carried out in enough depth yet to give a confident answer either way. Owners looking to support this instinct in a genuinely thoughtful way have a handful of reasonably simple options worth considering. Positioning a comfortable perch directly at window height gives a cat an unobstructed, stable vantage point, considerably more comfortable for long sessions than balancing awkwardly on a narrow sill. Placing a bird feeder at a distance that keeps birds safely out of striking range, generally at least several feet from the glass, allows a cat to watch comfortably without creating a situation where a bird might accidentally collide with the window itself. A genuine risk that bird feeders placed too close can sometimes cause regardless of any cat involvement at all. Rotating which window a cat has regular access to, if a home has more than one facing different types of outdoor activity, can also help keep the experience varied and engaging over time, rather than letting interest gradually flatten out from watching the exact same limited view day after day. Small adjustments like these tend to matter more than most owners initially expect, turning an already enjoyable instinct into something even more consistently satisfying. For owners without much outdoor bird activity nearby, a simple bird feeder even a modest distance from the house can make a meaningful difference, drawing in enough regular visitors to keep a cat genuinely engaged rather than left staring out at an empty, unchanging yard for most of the day. Even a single reliable feeder, checked by the same handful of birds every morning, is often enough to anchor an entire cat's daily window routine around it. Layering a comfortable bed or blanket at the base of a favorite window spot rounds out the setup nicely, giving a cat somewhere soft to settle into once the watching eventually gives way, as it usually does, to a long, well-earned nap in the same warm patch of sunlight. Pulling together everything covered across this section, a broader picture starts to settle into place. The specific, deliberately erratic movement that makes feather toys and real birds so much more compelling to a cat than smoother, more predictable motion. The seasonal rhythm tied to migration, and the separate, less visible version of this behavior that plays out after dark. A history stretching back roughly 10,000 years, tangled up in the earliest days of cats living alongside people. Real differences between breeds in how intensely the behavior shows up, and the layered body language, tail, ears, whiskers, posture, that lets an attentive owner read a cat's exact level of engagement almost like a second language. Whether shaping bird activity, and by extension a cat's own daily rhythm. An open, still unanswered question about whether cats recognize individual birds at all. And a handful of small, practical steps any owner can take to support this instinct safely and comfortably, from perch placement to feeder distance to something as simple as leaving a soft bed within reach of a favorite view. There remains a little more to uncover here, particularly around a few of the more unusual, less commonly discussed edges of this behavior still worth exploring further along, including how this same fascination shows up in completely different settings, from multi-cat shelters to outdoor sanctuary environments where the instinct gets far more room to actually play out. And a closer look at what happens when a cat's fascination with birds tips over into something closer to genuine obsession. Looking back over everything covered across this whole story, one thing stands out more than anything else. What looks, on the surface, like a small, almost comical habit, a cat frozen at a window, tail twitching, jaw chattering softly at nothing a person can catch up close, turns out to be carrying an enormous amount of history inside it. Eyes built specifically to catch the exact kind of movement a bird makes. A hunting sequence inherited largely unchanged from ancestors that never saw a house, let alone a pane of glass. A behavior shared, almost stroke for stroke, with lions and leopards on entirely different continents. None of it really needed the window to exist. The instinct was already there, fully formed, waiting patiently for something small and quick to eventually show up in front of it. The window just happens to be where most of us get to watch it happen up close, safely, harmlessly, over and over again, in living rooms all over the world. There is something quietly grounding about that thought. A cat asleep on a lap one moment, then locked entirely onto a sparrow the next, carrying, in that single shift, tens of thousands of years of history that never really left, no matter how many generations removed from the wild that particular cat happens to be. Thank you for spending this time exploring something so many people watch every single day without ever stopping to ask why. If this gave you a new appreciation for what is actually going on behind your own cat stare, consider liking the video, subscribing for more stories like this one, and sharing what your own cat does at the window down in the comments. Sleep well, and good night.